You guys obviously made a huge financial commitment to Odell Beckham just a few months ago. Are you committed to him being here in 2019, or are you open to trade ideas or anything with him as well?
We didn't sign him to trade him, if that's what you're asking me.
That's Dave Gettleman addressing the question of whether or not Odell Beckham Jr. will be traded. And Big Cat, I love it when we can see what the guy was doing when he's asked the question. He takes the big drink of water and he swishes it around like mouthwash. Like, why am I wasting my time even entertaining this question? But it's a real question because, remember, after they paid him, he did that interview with Lil Wayne next to him. And are you happy in New York? That's a tough question. How is that a tough question? It's yes or no. You're happy or you're not. So I think circumstances have changed. And I think there is value in at least considering what you could get for Odell Beckham Jr. And we're talking about this, obviously, because yesterday in a mailbag item that he did for The Athletic, Jay Glazer was asked to make a bold prediction for the offseason, and he chose to answer this question. He didn't have to answer the question. This is a written column. This isn't something he's doing where he's calling into a radio station and they asked him for a bold prediction. He specifically handpicked that question because he had an answer he wanted to give, and the answer is Odell Beckham Jr. is getting traded. And, of course, everybody lost their minds, and that's fine, but I think that there is reason to believe that Glazer knows what he's talking about. He wouldn't have said it if he didn't think there was something to it. He got started in the business covering the Giants. I think there's something there.
Isn't this just a sign that the offseason is here? Because last year it was the same thing. Remember John Mara gave the interview where he said a trade is highly unlikely, but no one is untouchable. And then the year before was right after the boat party. So it feels like, you know, when the fall comes, the leaves change, then the winter, the frost comes, then the offseason comes, and Odell Beckham is on the trading block. Quietly, but he's on the trading block.
Well, but remember last year that photo emerged of him somewhere with like uneaten pizza and some sort of a cigarette that may or may not have contained tobacco, and everybody lost their minds. And John Mara said, "Oh, I'm done talking about Odell Beckham Jr." That was at the league meetings in late March. He had this gaggle with reporters where he made it clear he's exasperated with OBJ, and that's when the talk started about maybe the Rams would try to get him, maybe the 49ers would try to get him, and then it all kind of died down, I think, because the Giants wanted too much. They wanted 2 first-rounders. But I think now that they had to pay him, I don't think his contract is untradeable. They'd have to take a $16 million cap charge for doing it. Okay, fine. Teams take cap hits like that all the time. I just don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. If they get what they want, they would treat him like anybody else, and no player is untouchable. You rip the name off the back of the jersey, and if you get enough in trade that makes you say, yeah, we'll move on from the guy, I think they would. And I think at a certain level they'd maybe like to.
Well, especially if they're saying we're going to have to rebuild this whole thing. The interesting part of this is how would it affect Eli Manning? Because if you're going to trade Odell Beckham, what's the point in bringing back Eli Manning? What's the point in having him be your quarterback? Because you're essentially saying we're not going to go to the playoffs next year, which I don't think anyone thinks. But this is how the NFL works. Every team says, you know, we're 1 or 2 players away from going to the playoffs. You see worst to first all the time. So that it's kind of a bigger conversation of where the Giants going as a full team and what are they going to do in the draft. I agree that no player is untouchable, and if you can get a lot for Odell Beckham, it's a no-brainer. But I do feel like this happens every year, and it's almost like a way to keep Odell Beckham in check, being like, hey, you might be traded. Then again, Jay Glazer does have a lot of sources. He probably talks to Odell Beckham himself. He knows a lot about the inner workings of the New York Giants. So you can't it's not just some random person saying it. Jay Glazer does he doesn't say things just for effect. He says things that he knows. So you have to actually, you know, take this as a serious rumor.
Yeah, and again, he handpicked that question and handpicked that answer, and a couple of tweets emerged in response to the news. Now, Odell Beckham Jr. had an interesting tweet that I can't see because he's blocked me. I still don't know why he blocked me on Twitter, but here's what he had. He had a couple of emojis, and I'm not real good at emoji interpretation, but it's a mouth with the zipper, which means I ain't saying anything, plus a smiling, blushing face. That emerged after Jay Glazer said what he had to say. So, look, I think that Beckham would like to get to another team. I think he'd like a change of scenery. I think he'd like to get even more money, and I think he'd like to play for a team on the West Coast. And we got that impression with that bizarre ESPN interview that he did last September. And he also would like a quarterback that's going to get him the ball more consistently. So I think that to the extent that Beckham would be on board with it, the answer is hell yes.
Yeah, of course he would say hell yes to this, because the Giants are a mess. And he probably wants to play some playoff football. And he probably wants to go somewhere where he is the guy, even though he is the guy in New York right now. But yeah, of course he would. I would see that he'd want to change.
But why do you take the money? This is what I never understand.
But,
why do these guys take the money and then 4 months later they want out?
Well, first of all, he hasn't said that he wants out. So let's not throw that on his feet right there, okay? Because that's not fair to say Odell Beckham is demanding a trade after taking money.
Okay, all right.
It's a rumor, so let's just be fair with that. But to answer your question, I think that that's just how pro sports work now. It's kind of similar to the NBA. Guys say, I'm going to sign the contract, and if I don't like the situation, I will just say I want to go somewhere else, and they will accommodate me. Because if you are a star in these leagues, if you are a star in the NFL, you have the power now. It's become more and more players' league to say, you know what, I'm not happy. I want to trade. And teams will say, well, what's the alternative? We can keep him here where he doesn't want to be, where he could possibly be a headache, or we could trade him and possibly get a ton of draft capital for him for a guy who's a superstar at the wide receiver position.
I was impressed. You were very responsible and careful there to make it clear that Odell Beckham Jr. has not yet asked to be traded. It makes me wonder whether or not you're trying to get him on Pardon My Take.
No, I'm being fair because I think there's a difference. What's amazing to me is when people lump an entire position group or the diva wide receivers all together. Antonio Brown's case and Odell Beckham's case are completely different in my mind. Odell Beckham is a distraction on the field at times because of things he does on the sideline, fighting nets, being over-emotional. I think that's more of he doesn't know how to control his own emotion during a game. Antonio Brown, by all accounts, is just a really not great teammate. And I think there's a lot of not great teammates on the Steelers. And he's very much about himself and very much, if I don't get the credit, then I don't want to be here. So I'm not going to put Odell Beckham and Antonio Brown in the same category. I think they're different cases. And I'd rather Odell Beckham than Antonio Brown right now.
I mentioned, Pardon My Take, you've had Jay Glazer on there before, and you don't have to bleep him if he says words that would otherwise have to be bleeped. He posted a tweet last night with heavy redactions for these purposes. He wasn't happy with the reaction that he got to his bold prediction of Odell Beckham Jr. being traded. There's a lot of there's more bleeps in there than non-bleeps, but he wasn't happy about any of this, and I'm kind of surprised. I'm going to call Jay at some point today. I thought about calling him last night, but I didn't want to get any of the splashback from whatever mood he was in. If you're going to say these things, you're going to have a reaction, and I'm surprised that at this point in his career, Jay's not a little more thicker skinned to just let that stuff kind of roll off his back and move on and go count his money if he needs to.
Well, I don't think this is a thick skin thing. I think Jay Glazer is just Jay Glazer. Like, he is a very passionate guy who says whatever he wants. You've been around him. I've been around him. He will speak his mind at any moment, and he'll probably challenge a bunch of people to get in the octagon with him. So this didn't surprise me at all. If you know Jay Glazer, I don't even think this is thin skin. I think he's just a passionate guy who's always looking for a fight.
My take on Jay, and I've told him this and I've said this before, being around Jay Glazer is like being around a dog that you're not quite sure whether or not it's going to bite you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. That's exciting.
Yeah.
It's like trying to tame a wild horse.
And I've yet to be bitten by him, but I may be after the things I've said over the last couple of minutes, so I'll stop saying that.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.